So I want to thank everybody for coming this morning and giving us your attention for a few minutes. My name is Jim McGee, and my wife Saarnijoki and I are again delighted to chair the Parents Committee this year. In our third and final year, you'll be relieved to hear. For those of you that were here last fall, you'll recall that we promised a raffle for two reasons. A, everybody loves a raffle. And then B, really to encourage parents of seniors to participate before in the Parents Fund before December 31st. So we're going to fulfill that promise this morning. Helping me with that is Amy Gorman, who is a proud parent of 2 Taft graduates and coordinates the parent committee activities. So Amy, who is the first winner?
Nancy Tilgman.
All right.
David and Kristen Stewart.
All right.
Are they here with us? No.
Uh-oh. Do we need to draw 2 more? No. We can start a little auction, a little live auction. And again, that was for 2 front row seats to graduation. So for those of you that don't have seniors this year but will in the years to come, keep that in mind. It's a great day. So show up early and you get a shot at the front row seat. So again, really just here to remind everybody to thank everybody in the audience who has already participated in the fund this year. Good news is 53% of you have already participated, so thank you. I appreciate it. I can sleep a little bit more soundly at night. The even better news is 47% of you are about to participate. So to that end, in the weeks to come, you'll receive a mailer from Willie kind of outlining the merits of the Parents Fund. Keep in mind that we have a bit of a streak here that I would love to maintain this year. In that 23 years, more than 90% of the parent body has participated in the fund. That's fantastic as it relates to any other peer school. I know that Willie loves to, at the end of the year, in the final meeting with faculty and staff, remind everybody that 90+% of the parents participated in the Parents Fund as a way to show their gratitude for everything that the faculty and administration has done for our children here 24/7, 365. So you'll receive some information from Willie in the weeks to come. You'll also receive a call or an email perhaps from one of the 50 parent committee volunteers encouraging participation, answering any questions you might have. Keep in mind they are not highly trained, highly paid telesolicitors, but rather people that just love the school so much that they're willing to give their time to encourage participation. And finally, if you could just give some thoughtful consideration to actually participating in the fund. So again, brief remarks this morning. Congratulations to the winners of the front row seats. And without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Willie, who's going to talk about participation in a different light for some great faculty members here.
Yeah, I want to recognize Jim and Sawney for what they've done. For 3 years, they have done what is a labor of love, but it's labor. And they have really been great friends to me and to the school. So Jim, Sawney, thank you for everything you've done. It's just deeply appreciated. So here's what I want to do today. I want to talk about a philosophy of education, and I want to talk about 3 faculty members who are going to be retiring at the end of the year. And it's a philosophy of education, I think, that is critical for this school, and I think critical for all of our schools. And it's something that has gone back in our history, and I hope that we never lose. And I'll go back to the moment when, in his memoir, Horace Taft recalled how in his early days he did absolutely everything. He lived in the dorm, and he taught Latin and civics, and he supervised sports. He wrote, "We had nothing for a school except ambition." And I love his phrase. He wrote, "Teaching was poor. Discipline was primitive and direct. I waked the boys up in the morning, pulling off blankets when necessary. It was hard work." And Taft was neither asking for pity nor singling himself out, but I think he was instead articulating perhaps the most essential, the cornerstone tenet on which all boarding schools rest, and that is that in order to teach the whole of the student, teachers must reach them in multiple capacities. Now, in industry terms, modern day, what he was alluding to is a phrase you may have heard of, which is the phrase, the triple threat model, meaning that faculty will teach classes, live in the dorm, and coach teams or clubs or drama. And it's the model that all the great New England schools have had, and they believe that it's only by doing this that we will achieve the kind of rich and empathic and varied relationships that are the basis for true learning and growing. And you sense it even here with one of my favorite pictures. Yes, that's Horace Taft. He was no different, obviously you can tell which one he is, but he was no different than any of the other teachers. He was the head of a school committed to the education of the whole student, and I think he was our original triple threat teacher. He loved being all things to all students, and he expected this of all faculty. And here he is coaching a sport, coaching baseball. Now, that term triple threat is still used today. In fact, if you go on the Carney Sando website, which is the largest teacher placement agency in the country, you can still find an article entitled Triple Perks of Triple Threats. This tells us that this model is very much alive and well, and it's common. So the teacher that you saw today teaching an academic class may well be coaching in the afternoon and then running study hall in the evening. I like to think of this as a kind of institutional heirloom, that this model is passed down to us over the years. Now, there's a financial argument for it, obviously. A school would be a much more expensive product if we had to hire 3 different teachers for physics, for the dorm, and for field hockey, rather than a single one. So there's an economic argument, for sure. But I think that the deeper and more compelling rationale is that we simply cannot conceive of what we are doing. You can't conceive of the mission of this school and the education of the whole student without the model that you see every day. Now, there's a force that's challenging this model, and it's that's the force of specialization. I think, by the way, it's a force that's challenging a lot of areas of our nation. And it's of the demand that in each area of school life would require a highly specialized achievement level and training. And every school feels this pressure. And if you push the question far enough, that is, if you push the question of specialization to its furthest extreme, you actually land at an existential place. You land at the place where you're saying, what kind of school are we? What is our mission going to be? And I would argue this, that whatever gains there might be, and I actually think they would be limited, whatever gains there might be in the model of specialized teachers, you would lose something of extraordinary and irreplaceable value. You would lose a belief that rests under everything we do, that it is only when we see the student through different lenses, that it's when we are giving teaching moments in diverse settings that we come to know the whole of the student. Now, here's how Lance Odden, my predecessor, and I think the finest headmaster I've ever heard of, put it. He wrote, "The great strength of the model of our residential school is that we are expected to meet students in all aspects of their growing and learning experience. Surely, helping the whole student was Horace Taft's greatest gift to us, and wisely the school has never wavered." Now, when Taft looked back on those crazy early years, when he was shaking boys awake and drilling them in Latin and then playing baseball, he realized that when the teacher knew the student in these multiple capacities, something profound happened. And here's how he recalled those days. And notice the language carefully. He said, "I suppose that nothing pleased me so much in my plan for a school as the idea that I might be a lay preacher, that the association with boys would give me the opportunity for deeply influencing their ideas and ideals." And you love the understatement, but let's be clear. He is staking out a claim for an educational approach that requires that teachers be fully engaged with the idea that if they do so, and if they are that fully engaged in the lives of students, teaching can become a sacred act. Now, maybe I can speak to the model more vividly by paying homage to 3 inspiring teachers, Ted Heavenrich, Linda Saarnijoki, and Rusty Davis, who, as you know, will retire at the end of the year with some 125 years of experience. And they have lived the life of the triple threat teacher, and they've embodied all that is good about it. And they remind me that this is a model that we must have. Ted Heavenrich. Now, most of you know Ted Heavenrich as a distinguished math teacher. I bumped into a pair of parents today who said sitting in watching his class was to see a master at work. But he's more than a math teacher. He's also an avid outdoorsman and a climber. He still runs the climbing wall in our gym. Now, in the climbing world, unless you're pretty crazy and you free climb solo, you probably climb clipped or roped to a partner you really trust. And come to think of it, that's a lot what adolescence should feel like. And when you start to climb, and this is, some of you may know this, you have someone standing near you who's anchored firmly, holding the rope through a device in his harness, and he's called the belayer. And your life is in his hands. And there's something formal about the language that the climber and the belayer use. There's something elegant about it. The climber says, on belay, to make sure that the belayer is ready. The belayer checks his knots and his equipment and his anchoring, and it's all set. He says, belay on. But to add some redundancy, to add some safety, the climber then says, climbing. And he won't actually start climbing until he hears the belayer say, climb on. And as you start moving up and placing protections in the rock and clipping your rope in, he's continually pulling in the slack. So if you fall, and you may fall, you won't fall very far. You'll be dangling there. Your partner's somewhere below you, and you'll think, he just saved me. Now that's a bit like what Ted Heavenrich has done in and out of the classroom. And who knows how many students since 1975 have roped themselves to Ted and heard him say, climb on. But I will tell you this, it's certainly in the thousands. Ted was born to teach. He grew up in Michigan. His father was a faculty member at the great Cranbrook School, and he found the way into teaching the way so many do. He had been a summer camp counselor. He wanted to give back. He had an interest in coaching. He studied math at Oberlin, played 4 years of varsity hockey there, and soon after that he received his master's from Wesleyan, and he was an absolute natural. When I arrived at Taft in the fall of 1976, he had only been here for a year, but somehow it felt that he was already an established veteran in the dorm and the classroom and the field. Maybe it was the beard, maybe it was just a quiet, humorous, gentle competence, but he already was at the heart of the school. He settled in, and with the exception of a sabbatical to travel and hike, he has been at the heart of this school. And when he retires, we will lose a force of constancy, a man of such stubborn caring, a symbol of steadfast commitment. When I hear alumni describe Ted when they visit Taft, they invariably offer with some nickname version of something like this. Mr. Mac, it's like heavy never changes. And I know what they mean, that it's that he looks exactly the same as he did from the day he was hired. But I always said, yeah, you're right. He never changes if you mean that for 40-some years he's been a model teacher, mentor, coach, and colleague. And scores of graduates stay in touch with Ted, writing, calling, and visiting. And when there's a reunion class, in particular from the 70s or 80s, and they're organizing their party on alumni weekend, our office has gotten used to the fact that someone's going to call up and say, is Ted going to be able to make it? For years, he ran our outdoor program all through the 70s and 80s. It thrived. He led overnight trips in the Adirondacks, day hikes in the Northeast Connecticut, kayak adventures. He never wanted credit. I know, I love that picture of him. He never wanted credit at all. He just wanted to share a passion he had with students. I don't think it ever occurred to him that Sunday was the one day off he had. And to this day, he's still pushing students up at the wall. His gaze was always on students. He never stopped asking how he could challenge them, care for them, support them as a teacher and as a class dean, as a coach and as an advisor. And as well as he has done it, he's never asked for recognition. He's as humble a man as you'll meet. For many years, Ted coached. He was a good soccer player. I've played with him so many times over the years, and he worked with different teams, girls and boys at all levels. And if you came out to practice, he would be playing with the kids, laughing loudly. He liked to heckle the kids in a loving way, having a ball. You couldn't keep him off the hockey rink. It's always been a passion of his. For many of us on the faculty, we associate him with our Tuesday night faculty hockey that we call Senile Six. This has been around for a long time. Here's Ted, he's our commish. And over-the-hill players like me, former college standouts, friends from town, colleagues from other schools. Ted was the guy who would send out the email reminding us that we were on at 9 o'clock, who passed out to the jerseys to make the team. Somehow his team was always a little stronger, who bought the pizzas afterwards when we went down to Davaloo's. And he had a way of roping us together. A Taft teacher might be sitting on the bench next to a Watertown landscaper and a coach from Gunnery or Kent who had joined us, men and women, young and old. And new faculty were being mentored, and they didn't even know it. They were seeing what it looks like to see a highly committed professional teacher also having fun. He gave us a few hours every week away from our work. He got us laughing about who didn't pass the puck or who was going to have to wake up early to prep for class. There are a lot of us for whom Tuesday nights will never be the same. He was a leader in the math department, one of the finest teachers. I hope some of you in your years have been able to see him at work. For years, he served as the department chair. He had a steady, calm hand, a command over the issues, a beautiful ability to connect and mentor. And that he was a master teacher of all levels is obvious. If you sat in, you saw him. He had great energy and enthusiasm, and students knew that he was going to ask them to perform. His explanations were incredibly clear. He advised our various math teams over the years, driving them to regional tournaments. He gave them problem sets that were steadily more challenging them. He pushed them gently. He nudged them a little bit higher every class. Students found themselves in new places, facing new problems, perhaps a little bit nervous, clinging to intellectual handholds, and that's where learning takes place. And maybe they would look down, wondering if they were okay. And there was Ted, roped in with them at class, giving extra help, at the math table, over lunch, smiling, saying, "Climb on." And he was more than just a great figure in the classroom. He was also one of the best mentors Taft has known. Over the years, too many teachers to count worked with him, sought his advice, looked at him as a model. He could sit with a nervous young teacher, maybe right after the class that didn't go well, when we are at our most vulnerable, when we're beating ourselves up, when we wonder whether we can do this. And an hour with Ted was a combination of therapy and coaching and cheerleading. Over the years, I've often asked math teachers who they look to for counsel, and I've heard, Ted, he's just an incredible colleague. Here's how Headmaster Lance Odden put it. Ted was a great hire. From the outset, his energy and commitment were everywhere apparent. As a teacher, he was singularly clear and always available for extra help for all of his students. He led the way in starting the math lab in the evenings for those who were struggling with a given night's assignment. Remember also, he created and ran the outdoor club for years, taking students rock climbing and kayaking and weekend camping. And then he became the soccer goalie guru, mentoring boys and girls alike at every level, from beginning to varsity starter. His care for those players was inspirational. Of course, for colleagues on the faculty, he was the glue holding together Senile Six, all the while building faculty morale. How typical of Ted that he identified needs and then stepped in to assure they were met. He also stays in touch with his students, especially his advisees, and after graduation, and he holds those relationships as precious. In some, he's been the model schoolmaster, and I'm proud that I persuaded him to leave Andover for Taft over 4 decades ago. You hear in Lance Odden the deepest admiration for a triple threat teacher, and with good cause. And he's talking about one of the most inspiring teachers I've known, someone who has done so much for so long, for so well. When you think of Ted, you think of that exciting moment for teacher and student alike when the ascent begins and we climb on faith and we lean into trust. To be roped to Ted Heavenrich was to be linked to a man of singular professionalism and commitment, to be safely pushed to scale higher, and to be clipped into a relationship of incredible warmth. To the students whom he taught and the faculty who called him friend, he tied himself tightly to you, and you never felt better. I told Ted I was going to speak about him. I don't know if he's here, but if Ted is here, Ted, thank you for what you've done for Taft. So. So, Chapter 2. Chapter 2 I titled Model and Mentor. Now, when I arrived at Taft as a new teacher in the fall of '83, I will admit that I had a blend of youthful anxiety and cockiness that typifies a lot of teachers, and those two qualities will either create or crush you, and what happens will largely depend on whether you end up with a good mentor. I was lucky. I found Linda Saarnijoki. She changed my life. She taught me how to teach, and she inspired me to strive to be 1/10 as good as she was. There are a lot of people who feel the same way. No one I know has served more selflessly, more compassionately, and more effectively as a leader, mentor, and model. I cannot think of Taft without thinking of her, and I'm still to this day asking her for advice. In my early years, I lived in HDT and CPT. I was teaching 4 classes, coaching and advising, and young teachers are asked to do a lot. Teaching at Taft with the expectations we have is very hard work. There's so much to live up to. You always think that there's someone out there much better than you. I may be exaggerating, but not much when I say that a couple times a week I was in Linda and Rusty's apartment or pulling up a chair in her classroom or office to pepper her with questions. Hey, Linda, can you explain again that rule for setting off the appositives with multiple embedded commas? Hey, Linda, can you help me on this chapter in Wuthering Heights? And what's amazing is I wasn't the only one doing it. Scores of teachers sought her out, and you wonder how she made the time. If you asked a teacher to draw a portrait of what a mentor and a model looks like, he or she would say, heck, find me a picture of Linda Saarnijoki. Man or woman, experienced veteran or rookie, English teacher or field hockey coach, Linda mentored us all, and we became a community through those acts of generosity. Her role in inspiring girls cannot be overstated. She showed them what success and strength and balance and achievement looked like, especially in our early days of coeducation. And this happened everywhere. Linda coached field hockey and volleyball. She lived in the dorm. She taught English. And importantly, she was also our first dean of faculty. And it was not lost on anyone that the headmaster consulted with her, that she hired faculty, that she ran some really important committees. Students looked at her and they were empowered. Her voice carried weight, but it was never ponderous. She was always right, but never righteous. She took things seriously, but she knew how to laugh. And when you think of her triple threat roles, and you start to do the math, you begin to realize how many students she worked with on a given day, and you cannot conceive of working in a school that did not allow her to do these many things with so many students. 4 classes, maybe 10 advisees, a field hockey team, sit-down dinner, dorm duty, extra help. That's maybe 100 students, and that's only a single Tuesday in a 40-year career. And she mentored faculty, all faculty, and particularly women, with a grace and a calm and a wisdom that was beautiful to watch. It was as if she was a gardener bringing to blossom an entire faculty. She knew when you needed space, and she found a way to move you into some new light. She became the stake that you lashed yourself to when the winds blew. She could prune back your complacency and outshot new growth. Linda did everything so well, with such dignity and grace, and with so little ego, and with such optimism. She made everybody better. It was not just that she had a maternal influence, which she did, or that she made you feel better when you were feeling sorry for yourself, which she did. It was also that she was so extraordinarily accomplished and experienced that she gave perfect professional and personal advice. She was not afraid to scold the teacher for whining. She was willing to point out your flaws. She could throw some cold water on you when you needed it. But the message came from such an authentic and caring place, you felt blessed. So teachers came to her with issues of all kinds, with fears, joys. I was one of them. The mid-boys don't respect me. We're going to have a baby. I'm feeling totally overwhelmed. I'm scared I won't be a good mother. My grandmother died over the weekend. I've never even read Great Expectations. I want to advance my career. Linda, how do you do it? She's always had a kind of gravitational pull, and you were drawn into her light and warmth. There were decisions that you wouldn't make until you talked to Linda. And when she finished a conversation, she usually touched me on the arm and smiled, and then she thanked you. She arrived at Taft with a BA from Middlebury and MA from Columbia. She was a cello player, a brilliant scholar, and she was a natural teacher her first day. She had done a lot of thinking about teaching as an undergraduate. There was something mature about her then. She was well advanced. She didn't ever seem to be a rookie teacher. And she was a great teacher. She could teach everything: Twain, Austen, and Morrison, Frost, Eliot, Dickinson, Miller, Shakespeare, and Williams. Her classes were intentional, fun, brisk, challenging, and she could reach everybody. That sleepy lower mid boy wrestling with that sonnet, or that senior girl bugging her out down the hallway asking about an iambic pentameter. Her capacity for work was mind-blowing. She graded papers as fast as anyone. I've heard Rusty talk about Linda sitting at the table all day Sunday grading. And yet the comments, even as quickly as she did them, the comments on the papers themselves were like mini essays with suggestions, corrections, reflections, inspiration. She shared materials with colleagues, tests, quizzes, grammar exercises, lessons plans, and you felt that you would hit the lottery if you opened your PO and found an exercise with her note on it with this impeccable cursive. She always seemed to be teaching everywhere. You would see her in the dining room with a student in a rough draft, in the faculty room with coffee and a young teacher. And here's what you should remember. In her days here, she did just about everything because she always volunteered, and everybody knew that she would do the job better than anybody else. There is no one I have known who has stepped forward more often or more generously. Her leadership on this campus simply has no parallel. She was a varsity coach, class dean, English department chair, director of professional evaluation and growth, dean of faculty, library director, holder of the William E. Sullivan Chair. I've never heard of a teacher at any other school assuming the roles that she did. And when there was a job to do, guess what? Every eye turned to her. Linda, would you mind running our 10-year accreditation self-study? Linda, would you mind being the dean of faculty again? Linda, could you step in during this maternity leave? Linda, could you do some research on faculty workload? Linda, could you convene a discipline committee? It is impossible to measure what Linda has meant to Taft, and I'm quite sure that no woman in our history has shaped the school more profoundly or permanently. There are roles we cannot think of without thinking of her, in particular the dean of faculty. The school moved, and this is critical to understand, the school has moved in directions we did because of her, especially in the advancement of women, in the institutionalizing of mentoring, in the crafting of community, and in the commitment to professional growth. She lived at the junction of innovation and tradition, always pushing herself and others to get better, and yet also fiercely defending the historic model of the triple threat teacher that she embodied so fully. And in that wonderfully rich role, which brought her to students and faculty in all of her capacities, she brought qualities that changed everyone she touched: a staggering strength and resilience, a singular unselfishness and willingness to serve, an enthusiasm and optimism that were contagious, an intellect that was probing and brave, and a compassion that seemed fathomless. She will retire, but I will never think of my work without thinking of her. I certainly cannot think of myself without her. Thousands of students and teachers will never forget her, and no one should ever think of Taft without remembering that she fundamentally bent the arc of destiny of this great school. I do know Linda's in the back. I move to chapter 3. It's about campus and camp. I've always thought if you wanted to understand Rusty Davis, you need to know about Camp Dudley, the legendary 130-year-old summer camp in the Adirondacks. It is an institution, I believe, of national significance. The motto, "The Other Fellow First," sounds a lot like our motto, "Not to be served, but to serve." It's an incredible place where boys learn and grow and laugh. It's where Rusty spent his summers as a boy, where he worked his way up to become cabin leader, division head, then a member of the board of trustees, and then the recipient of the highest medal of honor that they give to any alum. And when you spend time at the camp, and in the spirit of full disclosure, both of our sons attended, you're struck right away by the way in which the counselors just seem to have it right when it comes to kids. They insist that campers treat each other kindly and respectfully, but they're also a little bit nuts, and they have fun. And you visit the camp, and then you drive away thinking, there's something really special going on here. And so that's what Rusty Davis has brought to Taft: a belief in serving others first, a pitch-perfect perspective on adolescence, a conviction that a community works only if its members treat each other nicely, and a stubborn optimism and humor. So we were really lucky that Taft got Rusty here in 1972. Of course, he ended up luckier that 4 years later, Lance Odden hired that really smart and pretty Middlebury graduate, and I think Rusty would agree. Rusty graduated from Choate, where he was an athlete, scholar, and musician. There he is, Rusty. I didn't tell you I was going to get these pictures. And then played saxophone, obviously. And then at Princeton, where he got 2 degrees in aerospace engineering. And that fall, he began teaching physics, living in a dorm, coaching. He started one of the richest and most satisfying careers anybody could ever have in education. He's so multifaceted, it always staggers me. Many of you probably don't even know about that love of jazz. It started probably when he was playing saxophone. It never left him. For the past 40 years, he has been the man who's brought jazz to Taft. Amazing acts: Willie Ruff, Herb Ellis, Bill Mays, Judy Carmichael, Five Play, and others. Every year, he hosts a piano concert in his home in the spring, and he invites faculty and friends. He hires some great jazz pianist, and we sit in the living room, eat a great meal, listen to a concert on his mother's Steinway. He smiles, taps his feet in a room of 50 friends who just feel blessed that they're there. People ask me what Rusty does, and I say, well, everything. As with Linda, it's almost laughable to list the positions that he's held and the projects he's managed. AP Physics instructor, varsity coach, recipient of the Donald Oscarson Senior Master Chair, senior class dean, director of the summer school, dean of students, assistant headmaster, chair of too many ad hoc committees to count. He won't like me saying this, but if you wrote a history of this school and you began with a list of the people shaped it most profoundly and most permanently, his name would be on that top shelf right next to those 4 great headmasters. You don't know this about Rusty. He loves puzzles. Rusty puts out on a table in the lobby of WU, he always puts out puzzles. You can read what this one is. And you can sense the tone he has, how fun it is. This is a recent one, which is this plastic pig. I guess it was a really, really tough one. He puts it out there as a challenge to anyone. Go ahead, see if you can figure it out. And kids love it. He leaves it there. They get excited. They send him emails and texts. They stop by his office to tell him. He keeps track of who solves it. He posts it. I know one girl who found it before anyone else, and he put her up there and said, "You're on the Hall of Fame now." It's a small thing, but what kind of important lessons about the love of learning are happening here? Triple threat? He's a great coach. He would never say this, but I'll say it. I don't know that there's ever been a better coach at Taft than Rusty Davis. He was a golf coach, boys varsity golf coach in the late 70s when I was here, and he was a heck of a golfer. But as some of you know, it was with girls soccer that Rusty became a legend in his 23 years in that role. When Taft went coeducational, Rusty began coaching girls, and with him, Taft went from having no program to having a dynasty, and I don't use that word lightly. In 1987, Rusty's team qualified for their first New England championship. They lost in the finals. There are a lot of coaches who would feel proud if that ever happened. Then they brought home the New England champion trophy in 1988, 1989, 1990, 1991. In that 5-year period, this was his record: 74 wins, 3 losses, 4 ties. It's jaw-dropping. And of course, we only know this because he once had to write to Ginny Krusko, who's the great secretary up in the athletic office, to get the results of his career. And we know it because we still have this email. It was written in 2006. Dear Ginny, I don't know what form your records are in. I asked because I got a call a few days ago about some kind of soccer hall of fame of some sort. I don't actually really know what this is, but they want me to make me a member or something. They need records of my teams over the years. I think that's what humility looks like. He was way ahead of other coaches in terms of tactics and approach, and it was amazing to watch him conduct a practice or analyze a game. His girls adored him, and a lot of them stay in close touch. When there's a wedding or a birth, he's often one of the first to know. And I add that this is the guy who this year, when John Wilson was on sabbatical with the girls' basketball team, and given that Rusty, of course, had coached basketball as well on top of everything else, he stepped forward to say, well, I'm happy to be assistant this year. Do you know many other assistant headmasters who do that? He'll be at Choate this afternoon coaching that game. And he had a great balance. There's no question he wanted to win. Rusty's competitive, but he loved to have fun. Perhaps that's Rusty, perhaps that's Camp Dudley. And he was better than most male coaches in that he got girls. Coaching boys and girls is really different, and he knew that. Here's a quick funny story to show that, and to show, by the way, how fun follows Rusty Davis. If a boys' team loses after an away game, there's a kind of unwritten rule, and I say this as a former player and former coach. And the unwritten rule is that you trudge up onto the bus, coaches and players alike, and you have to be really visibly miserable. And I don't mean for a minute, I mean for a long time. And that any laughing or joking is showing that you're not suffering enough. And I hate to say, players know this, you feel sort of like the more miserable I am, the more the coach will want to play me. And so maybe an hour into the ride, you begin to hear some talking and joking in the back, but not right away, God forbid. Now, Rusty knew that coaching girls is different, and he's mentored other male coaches to understand how simultaneously girls can be really competitive, and then when the game is over, actually be happy. It's kind of amazing. And here's a story that he's told, and it has to do with a goal. And Rusty, I think it was after Deerfield. I know it was an away game and a 1-goal loss. So the long bus ride starts, And he took his seat in the front and sat there fuming and sulking the way us male coaches do. And after about a half hour into the ride, the top of his head itched. So he scratched it. And he sits there. And then it tickled again. And he scratched his head again. And then again. And this time he looks up and he can see Sarah, who's the star forward on the team, who's a short girl. And she has gotten up into the luggage rack. And she's commando crawled her way up forward while all the girls tried not to laugh, and she's reaching down and tickling his head. So Rusty, of course, falls apart laughing and yelling at the girls, and I think they won their next 11 games. So there are a lot of reasons that Taft got the reputation early for being a great school for girls. And I think Lance Odden, the great headmaster, deserves the lion's share of the credit. But one of them was that Rusty was coaching. And I meet women all the time in my travels who still talk about him. He's one of the funniest guys I know. We laugh a lot together. To be fair, our wives don't get it. They think that we're still a couple of 13-year-olds because we do Inspector Clouseau Pink Panther imitations. I confess that we can quote entire scenes from Frank Drebin in the Police Squad movies. And we tell us stories. We like to tell stories about how teenagers can do dumb things. But I would say this, you need that kind of perspective. This is hard work, and no one has had more fun at a boarding school than Rusty. He was a great dean of students. And by the way, what more do you need to know about a triple threat teacher than that job description right there? He had, I think, a remarkable perspective and balance in what it meant to be a dean of students. He had an incredible touch, and even after 13 years of that job, now by the way, that is a really, really tough job. He never got tired. He never got bitter. Listen, he had no trouble reading a student the Riot Act, no trouble enforcing the rules, but he also knew that the job of teenagers is to be stupid, and he could have perspective, and he could forgive even when he punished. He seemed to know that a campus should have a little bit of camp in it. And even when things were really hard, maybe when a student had been expelled, when there was some issue that was roiling campus, he could smile. School is fun, he reminded us. Lighten up, he sometimes said. And he always said it right when we needed to hear it. Here's a story maybe that shows that. It's a story that I share because, as you remember in the fall, I talked about how stories become myths and culture is carried in stories. It's a story about the time that the bust of Lincoln was stolen. You all know what I mean, the bust of Lincoln in Lincoln Lobby. It was stolen as a prank. So one spring day, we noticed, I was a young teacher, I don't know, Rusty, it feels like I was a second or third year teacher, something like that. And we noticed that the brass bust and the whole wooden stage that it's on was missing. Now this is a historic and valuable sculpture. It weighs about 100 pounds. People were not happy. I was a young teacher living in CPT. Rusty had a pretty good idea who might be behind this. And he said, Mac, listen, you know some of those troublemakers. Why don't you go see if we can find out who kidnapped Lincoln, and we can figure a way that we can maybe negotiate his return. So, well, right there, you can see where this guy's mind is. So I got the word out, and sure enough, I went around the dorm saying, hey, anybody know who kidnapped this? This is serious. And so I got the word out, and as I say, a day later, Dean Davis got a ransom note on the desk. You know the kind, it was words cut out from the newspaper. And it read something like, in block capitals, if you ever want to see Abe alive, give us a headmaster's holiday. So Rusty thought this was pretty funny, and I did as well. And so he sent some demands along with the normal, look, we don't negotiate with terrorists idea. And it was great. I was shuttling notes back and forth. Some of them left in obscure places like under seat 114 in Bingham, or taped behind a portrait in the main hall. And he kept coming up with more schemes. And the kidnappers, they were very tough at first, I will tell you. Along the lines of one message, which was, we'll cut off his ear if you don't meet our demands. But we kept at it, and Rusty kept pushing, and after 3 days of tense negotiations, we had them down to 5 large pizzas. But here's where it got really fun. In those days, there was a cop show, some of you may remember, called Miami Vice. And so Rusty and I decided that we'd dress up in linen pants and pink shirts, and we got some plastic cap guns. And we decided this is what we were going to do. We were going to hide in Lincoln Lobby for the drop. And we got Linda to serve as the go-between. Will it surprise you that Linda was the only one that both sides could agree with, right? And so we arranged that, at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night, you will return Lincoln, and once we're assured that he's alive and well, you would get the pizzas. What they didn't know is that Linda and Rusty and I were scheming. And if you go into the Lincoln lobby, you'll notice the 2 outside doors, there's actually a crawl space above it. So I was hiding up there. And before I got up there, I stuffed Rusty in a garbage can that was right there with some crumpled newspaper and banana peels on top of him. And Rusty, I can remember this with you. We had to get there early, right? So we're sitting there for like 45 minutes, trying not to laugh. He's in the garbage can, I'm lying up top. And you could hear the normal hustle and bustle of school. And then finally, at around 5 or 6, we could hear the banging as they dragged in Lincoln. Bang, bang. And you could hear the kids high-fiving. Yeah, we've got them, all that. And Linda then arrives, and at the prearranged signal, she said, okay, boys, I can now vouch to see that Lincoln is alive and well. Let me get your pizzas. And on that, we jumped out hollering, you're arrested, with our cap guns blazing. We gave him 5 pizzas, we shared some slices, and Rusty said, don't ever touch Lincoln again. He's been one of the best classroom teachers I've ever known at Taft. He's brilliant, of course. He's Nassau brilliant, but I know smart people who couldn't teach you how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I've not known as many teachers who could take a complex subject and make the material, make the concepts so clear. And he did it so creatively and so effectively. His explanations were so impeccably logical that concepts that were utterly confusing became simple. Students loved to learn from him. I'd often stop by his office. I'm an English teacher. None of this makes any sense to me. And I'd ask a question just because I wanted to see what great teaching looks like. Hey, RD, how come when I'm sitting on a bicycle and I'm moving forward, I can balance, but when I stop, I can't? Rusty, what's the difference again? Remind me, what's the difference between amps and volts? Hey, Rusty, what's going on when a turkey vulture is teetering in the air like this and still stays aloft? Can you explain what's happening to me aerodynamically? Learning was so fun in his classes, whether you were a lower mid or a senior in AP Physics B. He had all kinds of crazy demonstrations, spinning tops, stuff with batteries and wires, and yo-yos flying around, dart guns, liquid nitrogen. For years, he did an annual school meeting on the stage where he would conduct experiments, and students couldn't wait for that annual one. There would be sparks flying and bananas being frozen and people lying down on a bed of nails. He and I actually pulled one over on the kids one time when he asked me to come out of the audience. And he took a towel and he rubbed my head like this to make static electricity. And then we took a light bulb and we put it in my mouth. And the light bulb glowed. And the kids went crazy until he said, actually, it's a trick. There's a battery and Mr. Mack has some tinfoil in his mouth. For the past 5 years, I've asked him when he was going to teach his potato gun class so I could watch. This is where he takes the kids outside and he squirts some lighter fluid into this PVC tube and then he blows a potato across the soccer field and they have to figure out all kinds of things. I think velocity and trajectory, acceleration. I remember vividly watching one AP class and I still have a picture of them while he pushed them and cajoled them and gave them part of the directions but not enough and made them get the answer wrong and then finally right and they really finally got it. I have a picture of that class to this day. It won't surprise you that there's a girl in that class who went on to MIT and there's a boy in that class who's flying Navy jets right now. And amazingly, as good as he was, he always wanted to get better. Teaching from his wheelchair, Rusty realized he needed new ways to demonstrate, so he started working with technologies well before other teachers did. He found websites with interactive experiments. He used software on his iPad that allowed him to share real-time problem solving. He made videos of experiments that you could link to. You know, when an older dog is learning new tricks like that, you're seeing what a lifelong learner looks like. For a lot of us, from 2 headmasters and more teachers I can count, Rusty's been a source of the greatest wisdom and counsel and caring. My day is not complete until I've had coffee together. I think I probably chat with Rusty 3, 4, 5 times a day. And over the years, faculty and students alike have beaten a path to his office for advice. He's the strongest man I've ever known. He's a dear friend who inspires me every day. And there are a lot of people at Taft and Camp Dudley who look at his perseverance and spirit and energy, and they're made better people just because they knew him. I know this, there's no school that's been better served. And I also know you cannot think of this great place without realizing how it was shaped forever by Rusty Davis. Now, maybe it's not fair to lump Rusty and Linda together since they had great individual careers, but it's also hard not to. Here's how Headmaster Lance Odden described this amazing couple. Artie and Linda were the great schoolmasters they have been precisely because they could and were willing to do it all. They never begged off of a responsibility. They carried them off with deep commitment and passion. Their love of young people was evident from the first time I interviewed them, and it never waned. It only got wiser. They found joy in every aspect of students' lives and their achievements. When things went wrong, they were both masters of the art of listening, not judging, and of then helping. Only faculty who see the full dimensions of student life can do this, and few can do it as well as they. Significantly, this very set of skills is what made them such invaluable advisors to you and me. Their listening skills invariably brought them to walk in the shoes of others. They gathered information and understanding, never rushing to judgment, and they helped the individual involved come to see and understand their shortfalls and how to do even better. On occasion, they would bring a well-analyzed problem for you or me for a final resolution, and then they always would participate compassionately in the resolution. Their wisdom and compassion was rooted in the deep belief in service, which inspires the very best of our great calling. You just heard a great headmaster speak about an amazing couple. I think you also heard the case for a triple threat teacher. So Rusty, thanks. Linda, thanks. Look, that this talk is a tribute to three great teachers is obvious, but it serves as a Trojan horse as well, and I'm sneaking in an argument that Ted and Linda and Rusty embodied exactly what the triple threat model looks like in its best iterations, and they stand as proof that the model retains its power and value. Now, you cannot imagine them doing what they did and what they did for so long if they weren't given the opportunity to reach students in multiple capacities. Their work and the work of every teacher here requires this. It's what Horace Taft was getting at when he reflected on what he had come to learn about teaching. You will recall that he felt that a teacher could become something of a lay preacher, ministering to the heart and the mind and the soul. It's not work for everyone, he admitted, but he said this, that granted the right ideals, the earnest devotion, the required personality, a teacher at a boarding school coming into such close contact with students at a formative period of their lives can have an influence which, in my judgment, goes beyond that exercised by any but the greatest clergymen. Taft knew what he was suggesting when he used that word, clergymen, and Ted and Rusty and Linda would recognize the sense of higher calling, the opportunity to shape the heart and the mind, and the conviction that when we serve as they have, the work on this campus may come as close as a school will ever get to the sacred. And so with a deep sense of gratitude to them and to all of you for all you do at Taft, thank you and welcome to Parents' Day. Thank you.